And so we're really excited to talk about failing forward, the long road to standards. So everyone do me a favor and please give it up for CMLS Director Michael Werzer, CEO of FBS.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, what a great crowd. Man, it's just amazing to look out here at such a huge audience. And I'm really, really happy to be able to come and talk to you about standards. We've been working at FBS with the RISO group for a long time. I think I attended the second meeting of the, at that time, RETS organization back in like 2000 or something like that. And so it really has been a long journey. And I want to talk to you about that because sometimes it feels like it's just taking forever. And that's in some ways true. Truly, standards is a process that goes on for a long time, and that's a good thing because it constantly evolves. But we've been at the forefront of doing a lot of the standards work, and so I want to talk to you about that because we've learned a bunch of lessons along the way. It has been something that I think is critical to our industry. We really have all seen the benefits. I think recently in the break they passed out a white paper on each of your seats where Tribus, a vendor who's implementing IDX websites and other tools for brokers, has proven the power of standards. So I think it's critical to our industry. And I want to dive in just a tiny bit on some of the other buzzwords that you might hear, because sometimes these things are, standards in particular, man, it's got RETS and RISO or RESO. Who says RISO? How many? How many say RESO? Yeah, not so many. That's a big debate. We talk about it all the time. We need a standard for that, but it sounds like you all say RISO instead of RESO. All right, excellent. Well, sometimes these things, we all hear them, we know them, but do we really all share the same understanding of some of these things? And in particular, one of the buzzwords that's been around for a while, but is in the news a lot more recently is, front end of choice. This idea that there'd be multiple ways of accessing the MLS from the MLS provider. And so there's just a lot of buzz around that. And so I kind of wanted to talk about it because that concept, front end of choice, has really been at the heart of the standards that RISO has been evolving for the last 10 years or so. And that's where some of these other buzzwords like Web API comes from. All of this talk about APIs and different acronyms, it can be a lot to take in, and some people may or may not share the same understandings. So we're going to dive in a little bit about that and kind of try and explain what does this front end, back end stuff really mean and try to simplify it a tiny bit. So the old way of going about dealing with data before the API approach that you all have been working hard to implement over the last years really is a good analogy to using VHS, I think. This is the analogy we came up with where you have the front end, that's your television, maybe it's your phone, whatever the case might be. The front end is what you're looking at, how you're viewing the content. And the back end is the tape, right? It's the data. It's what content that you want to view. And of course, we're all familiar with that old model where you'd go to the store and you'd get the VHS tape and you'd have your copy of it. And there were thousands and thousands and thousands of copies all over the place. Every house that wanted to watch that movie would have a copy of it. And that's very similar to the way a lot of applications, software applications today operate, where they copy the entire MLS database. And so there are copies and copies and copies of MLS data everywhere. The concept of the Web API, again, this sort of started around 10 years or so ago, where people were like, well, there might be a better way managing and figuring out and policing and tracking and doing all of this stuff with all these copies everywhere is quite the task. It's burdensome, it's difficult, it's challenging for MLS providers and MLS vendors and everybody else. There is a challenge around that. And so there might be a better way. And so the analogy here might be to Netflix, to say, hey, what if we can stream that content instead from sort of a single approach, and now instead of each house having their individual copy, when they want to watch the movie, boom, they get streamed right to their house. And that's kind of the same concept around the API, right? So you've got a single backend now that streams the content when that application needs it, and now they can attach all sorts of different front ends to it. All right, so relatively straightforward process, right? The lessons that we learned, however, and let me back up a second and just say that that is the model that most APIs use. Like Google Maps is a great example. If you're interacting with Google Maps through your MLS system or somewhere else, well, that's just going and getting the map tiles that it needs at that second. It's not downloading all the map data to a local server and then processing it and having copies and copies and copies everywhere. This is the same basic model. And so we came out with our Spark API before Rezo had really adopted that, and then it evolved into what's now called the Web API as a standard. And the idea was, hey, fewer people would copy the data. But the lesson we learned was that that is not what people want. Rather, the developers want to copy the data. They just want to keep copying the data, which is understandable, 100% understandable. Why? Because their software already works that way. They expect a local copy at their servers. That's critical. They don't want to rewrite all of their software to deal with that. There might be performance concerns or other legitimate reasons why they want to copy it. But this does have consequences for you as an MLS as you implement the Web API and as you implement some of these other things. There are consequences. But we kind of were hopeful as we implemented the Spark API that fewer people would want to just replicate and copy the data, because we truly wanted to help MLSs solve this problem of managing and enforcing and policing all these different copies. But it just, as of yet, that's why it's a long journey, it hasn't really come to be. People are using the Web API, but they're using it to copy the data. The other lesson we learned in this front end of choice initiative, or this push towards having more than one way to access the MLS data, is that it's not just about the listings. In order to really have a good experience around that, for example, on a mobile device, you need to have more than the listings. The agent wants to access their contacts, and they have saved searches and all sorts of other data that is part and parcel of the experience of the MLS. And so really, we want to make that available through the APIs, and Rezo has done a great job of adding that additional content. But again, the real-world implementation we've seen is that not nearly as many people access or want to access that kind of data yet as they do listings. Really, it's just still focused so much on the listings. And that's important, but it leads to my third lesson learned. Somebody else said it on stage earlier, that the real key to this issue, of getting any new tool, I think it was Sheila Dodson was saying, hey, getting agent adoption is critical. So one of the visions that we had with the Rezo standards was to say, hey, MLS conversions, they're such a pain. They should be instantaneous. They should be easy. It should be plug and play. Instead of having to do this major uplift every time you want to have a different MLS experience, it should be relatively straightforward. But when you don't deal with searches and when you don't deal with all of these other things, it's not plug and play. That legacy data ends up trapped in that other system. And so you end up with a real adoption challenge. It is a big uplift to move somebody to a new platform. And now you've got that same issue. You'll see that more and more and more with these front ends of choice, right? Is that truly an experience where they can go and use this other tool, but they're not going to see the data that they expect to see, or is it all going to be there? So these three lessons kind of raised the question, and I think there's a real issue in the industry too just about front-end of choice. Is that really what you, the MLS, wants or not? That's what we've been building for with the long road to standards for 10 plus years, was trying to enable that. But is that actually, do people care about that or not? Of course, we want to incent competition, create competition, and give choice. But at the end of the day, the MLS now has to support multiple front ends. And so far, agent adoption has proven to be a huge obstacle to truly creating that front-end of choice concept. So it's an open question, I think, whether the market is actually going to support this. So I've got three exactly, take-homes, takeaways for you. Number one here is that I think the industry needs to engage in a very real conversation about replication, about copying. There are some applications that copying absolutely makes sense. It's the right way. It's the only way, perhaps. But there are other applications where it doesn't make sense. And yet I don't hear that conversation happening at the MLS level. Maybe some technologists are talking about it, but that decision is yours. That's the MLS's decision. So for anybody who's taking CMLX3 in this coming set of sessions, anybody out there? Got some here. If you're going to be into CMLX3 in the next group here, I would love to see you take on this idea. What is the best practice so you could advise and work with and that CMLS can communicate to all of its MLS members? What's the best practice around replication? We've got this new web API. When should an application copy the data? And when should they not copy the data? Those are license agreement issues that you all need to advise us on and help us on. And there's a collaboration with the technologists. But I just don't see that conversation happening, and I think it should. I think this is a really big decision. If you don't talk about it and make some kind of guidance and move forward in a productive way, what's going to happen is we're just going to keep doing what's been happening. And that's not terrible. Again, there are a lot of applications that need to replicate. But how can we make it the best and really implement this in a way that's going to work for everybody? I also encourage you, as a takeaway, to incentivize web API adoption. We all have put a lot of money into investing in these new standards, and they're awesome. They're truly providing benefits as outlined in that white paper. But we've got this opportunity now to really move people forward onto it. And sometimes you hear, oh, nobody is adopting it, nobody's asking for it. Well, that's because they need to hear the message over and over and over again. And so there are a couple of ways to really emphasize this. One is the data dictionary. That's where the data is standardized. And with the web API, that's the best way of getting that standard data. So make sure you communicate the value of the data dictionary when people call for data. Say, hey, go to the web API because that has standardized data. But another great one, a customer of ours, actually here in Florida, they're doing some regionalization and they're going to have a combined feed. But they're going to only offer that combined feed through the web API. Those are great ways of getting adoption, getting people to move over. When you have these efficiencies, that's what the standards are about. So keep thinking about ways you can incentivize people to move over. The third thing I would ask is set expectations. When we use words and buzzwords like plug and play, et cetera, it can sometimes seem like magic. It's not magic. There's hard work that everybody has to do here. So you kind of have to set expectations that it is a long journey. This isn't going to happen overnight. We've been at it for 20-some years, and we're going to be at it for another 20 years. But the progress is continual, and we are making great strides in moving this forward. But keep setting expectations within your organization, with your brokers, to say that it is a journey. It is a long road. That doesn't make it not worth it. And I think if we do all of those things, at the end of the day, we're going to have it where we have no road to worry about, right? So this is the back to the future moment where we can say that past was great, but we're really looking to the future where we can create applications that our members need, that the brokers need, and that the community needs to make the market work. So that's my pitch to you on those 3 items. I greatly appreciate your time, and I hope you have a great conference.